So, Research estimates that North American grocery retailers lose more than $70 million every single year. Alex Jobin, lead solution principal at RELEX, is going to share how you can maximize profitability by reducing food waste. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. All right, perfect. So we are going to talk today really about how we're tackling food waste within retail. Before we get into that, I do just want to kind of hit you all with a few statistics regarding some of the food waste that we're seeing within our industry as well as within the United States. And the first statistic is really every single year, about a third of all the food the world produces is lost and wasted. Now that's a huge number, and of course not all of that comes from retail. But what we do know about retail specifically in grocers is that about 430 billion pounds every single year is thrown out and spoiled by grocers, which is about 10% of the total food waste within the country each year, which is a massive number. So this is something that's really important for us socially to make sure that we focus on, but also understanding that these are huge numbers for some of these larger grocers, and within that, about 2 to 3 grocers that were surveyed are actually reporting about 1.5% of their revenue or greater is going directly to food waste. So these are huge opportunities. In fact, a $1 billion grocer sees about $15 million worth of food waste every single year. So when we think about the amount of profitability that we're giving away to food waste, this is a really big problem that optimization as well as better analytics and better data can help us solve. And what we've seen within RELEX, and what I'll show here on the slide in just a sec, is actually we did an independent study with Gaia Research. Gaia Research is a consulting company that focuses directly on sustainability. And what you'll see here is they actually went out, pulled data from 4 RELEX customers from different industries. So as we think about supermarkets, e-commerce, we also have wholesale and convenience. We saw massive improvements in food waste from each one of these 4 customers. And this is really typical of most of our RELEX implementations, where we can see massive increases in improvements to food waste. So as we think about that, in total, these 4 businesses produced almost, RELEX was able to reduce the amount of food waste by almost 20 million pounds. And we thought about this, and one of the big things for us was, okay, we can see that in terms of pounds, but what does that actually mean in terms of our carbon footprint? And what this actually calculates to is avoiding the CO2 of almost 70,000 New York City flights between New York and Paris. So that's massive. And this is just from 4 of our clients. As we think about the scalability of this food reduction or food waste reduction, it's really on a massive scale. Now, we also want to understand all the different themes that are going on within Fresh. So thinking about sustainability, our customers want to make sure that where they're shopping, practices and being able to demonstrate that we are being sustainable is really important. Retailers are also understanding, and grocers specifically, that reducing shrink is a huge profitability maker. The other thing too is in terms of just-in-time replenishment, we've had massive changes within just-in-time replenishment. Suppliers not being able to get stock, trying to figure out new suppliers, bring on different products in order to figure out some of that transference between products. This is super important as we start to make sure that our supply chains are actually future-proof, that they can be flexible, even when things aren't necessarily just in time. We've also seen a massive explosion of omni-channel. So where are our customers shopping? Are they picking things up in store? Is it a curbside pickup? Are they actually ordering from an Instacart or directly from e-commerce? All of these different channels, we want to make sure that we have inventory there to support any of our customers' needs. But also, where should that inventory be can also prove huge challenges for us as we understand which inventory should be where and how much waste is that going to produce for us. The other thing that's important is we start to see, some of these dark stores pop up. Retailers who are using those third-party fulfillment centers to actually make sure that product gets to consumers even within 15 minutes. So Fresh, and in particular grocers that focus on this, have a lot of change that has happened really within the last year and a half. But what is it that RELEX can actually do for Fresh? All of this really starts with leveraging machine learning. And we've talked a lot about this, and Josh Mann, our director of product, actually went into some pretty great detail about some of the automation and machine learning that we're actually doing right now, as well as some of the roadmaps that we have into our future. But as we think about this from a Fresh perspective, we know that we need to take into account seasonality, any of those weekday trends, any of that variation in demand that can be detected. And then as we think about some of those different business decisions that happen, promotions, what's happening within our space? Are we changing spaces? Is there a store remodel? All of these different things affect how our customers are actually going to be shopping within our stores. And then we can think about things that are external, things like weather, things like different local events, things like everyday low prices and how price and competitive pricing can actually change consumer behavior at our stores. And by using really our demand AI, we're able to take all of those different demand patterns, business decisions, and external factors all into one system and really get a forecast that is much more accurate. And what that does is that allows us to integrate our different supply chain functions. So as we think about this, the first piece of this is really that demand forecast. But again, that demand forecast is going to be not only just for our stores, it can be for our fulfillment centers, it can be all of those different channels that our customers are shopping. And then what that demand forecast allows us to do within an integrated supply chain where we don't have separate systems for each function, we don't have separate systems for forecasting, for our store replenishment and our DC replenishment. When all of this is on the same platform, it allows us to create really accurate projected orders and planned orders that we actually share between each level of our supply chain. And what does this actually mean? This means that when we have that demand forecast at the store, it translates into what does that store need in order to make sure that we're in stock for our different levels of basically our different customer satisfaction levels that we have set. And that projected store orders, or the orders that are going to be coming from the DCs, that is basically used as the effective forecast for our DCs. And what that means is that when something changes at the store, say a Kardashian comes in and decides to take a picture with a random tuna, or a TikTok trend happens, that's going to change how customers shop at the store. And when our systems aren't actually connected, that demand change at the store isn't recognized at the DC. When we do have a supply chain that's integrated, that demand forecast is going to be seen at the store, that change in sales. That's going to change how we're ordering to our DCs and ultimately change how we're ordering from our vendors. And so this really gives you the flexibility to be able to change rapidly with new and different trends, be able to move inventory more efficiently across our supply chain, and make sure that final accuracy that you have across all of these different channels, whether it's store pickup, ship to home, or even sharing some of that responsibility for forecasting with your vendors for some of their products is really optimized. Now, specific to retail and specific to Fresh, we need solutions that have capabilities to basically address some of the hardest things within Fresh. Some of the hardest things that we have within fresh are when we have multiple variants. And this could be you have your normal red apple, or you have your organic red apple. Are those the same SKU, or are they separate SKUs? Do we need to forecast those differently? How does seasonality actually affect each one of these apples? Who are we actually getting these apples from? Could we be getting the same apple from multiple vendors? And what is the difference between any of those weights or average weights between any of those apples? It starts to get really complicated. And the way that it starts to get even more complicated is when we have any of these additional factors. So again, weather plays a huge factor on how do we forecast properly for our fresh items. As we think about, barbecue season, summer, rain, all of this is going to affect how our customers shop in stores. The other thing that's really important is all these different prices that we might have, the unit of measure. What's the unit of measure that we're purchasing from a certain supplier? And then what is it that unit of measure is actually being sold within your POS system? So making sure that we have the data to back all of this is really important. And the way that we're able to do this successfully is by making sure that demand is correct, right? Leveraging all of that machine learning, that artificial intelligence, all of those capabilities, as well as incorporating any of those external factors like weather, incorporating prices and promotions, and then any of those effects between items. We need to make sure that all of that is taken into account. And that's great on the forecasting side and understanding, what is our demand. But how do we actually maximize in-store shelf life? Again, of course, it starts with that day level demand and even interday forecasting, right? When we have multiple forecasts that we need to do throughout the day, we have those capabilities to do that. But what's even more important is what's actually happening on the replenishment side. How do we drive allocation in our replenishment systems by effectively figuring out what is that balance between what our customers want, so that customer satisfaction level, or any of the waste that we might have. This balance is incredibly important, and what RELEX can do is we can actually figure out what's that optimal level of safety stock for some of your best and most difficult products to forecast for and create safety stock so that we're actually running at a much more profitable level. A lot of times what we see is that grocers, because we don't have visibility into how to optimize for spoilage or how to optimize for customer satisfaction at the same time, we actually end up pushing a lot more product that's actually necessary. And we're okay with some of those spoilage levels, right? And a lot of this just becomes something that we're not able to attack because we don't have the technology to do this. What RELEX is able to do is actually make sure that those projections of spoilage are shared with you and your team, that we can take into account things like batch or lot codes or expiration dates of all of these to make sure that when we're projecting spoilage, we already have an order on the way to maintain those high availability levels, but also alert users when we have items that are high spoilage items. Should we actually be taking a different approach for our apples versus how our bananas are actually stocked within our different categories? So this is really important. And really the biggest thing here is how do our teams actually execute on this? Within RELEX, we drive exception-based processes in order to automate so that your teams aren't necessarily stuck pushing orders or pushing allocations that they do every single day. Let's automate what we can and allow our teams to focus on where they're able to make the largest impact, figuring out which products have high spoilage rates. What are some solutions that we might have? Is it talking with a vendor? Is it communicating with our store teams differently? All of those problems we can start to focus on as we're not stuck just pushing product all day. Now, when we talk about superior functionality for fresh and where we've kind of come since the beginning of this presentation, again, those are those three different more or less sections, right? We need that accurate forecast as a baseline for everything that we do. Those granular forecasts down to the SKU store level, as well as that day level forecast, so that those safety stocks can be optimized by every single day, right? It doesn't make sense for us to push product that we know we're not going to have a lot of traffic to during the weekend. Should we actually, especially when we think about fresh, not be pushing product if we don't need to, in order to make sure that we're not just pushing product down to the stores and spoiling it? But the other thing as well is with grocers, we also have a lot of other product that's going to the stores. How do we smooth any of our deliveries? And a lot of that comes back to this baseline forecast and these machine learning optimizations that we're doing. And along with some of those replenishment pieces, we need to make sure that we have some of that batch level control of expiration dates. Visibility into that is massive. The balance between spoilage and what we actually need to keep on hand is really important. And then what are we doing within any of those pick to zero or force outs? Can we automate some of those processes? And then any of those special requirements that we might have that are particularly of importance for grocers, bill of materials. How are we making sure that those manufactured products, our sushi or any of the salads that we're creating either in store or at a DC and then shipped to store, that we have the right amount of product to fulfill any of those projected orders? But also as we think about kind of the reverse of that, when we have a whole cow that's shipped to a store and we have different cuts, and then the excess of that or the waste of that could be ground beef. Well, that's going to change how we're actually fulfilling our normal vendor fulfilled ground beef orders as well. So given supply chain visibility to all of that is really important. And then finally, that flexible planning at those different levels of the organization, whether or not we have an apple SKU that could be 6 different apples depending on the region or depending on the suppliers and supplier availability, or are we even more specific and have an organic tomato versus a normal tomato? Now, let's go back to some of our customer results, because this is really important. It's one thing to talk about it, it's a whole nother to walk. And what we see here is this is one of those wholesalers that we actually looked at for this Gaia study. And what you'll see here is Medigo, they're a Swedish major food supplier. They're actually part of Cisco. And what you'll see is that we were able to get a spoilage reduction of 27%, which is massive across multiple different categories. What's more important as we think about, how does that translate into CO2 emissions? This is over 600,000 pounds of CO2 emissions that's saved. So these are massive results. We can also look at more of a convenience example. This is WH Smith. WH Smith is actually a really great example of how we're using external data to actually feed our forecasts. And what they're doing is they're taking, because they're in a lot of train stations and airports, they can take any of that external data of ticket purchases, understanding how many people are going to be arriving on certain days, and use that as part of an influence to their forecast to make sure that they're not over purchasing for certain days. And this has a big effect on their fresh capabilities. And we can see that within that spoilage reduction. Now, this whole research study is actually on our website. It's a great read if you'd like to look at it. We also go over a couple of other retailers. So Bunting, they have a couple of different banners in Germany. They're a supermarket, and then colonial.no, which I believe has changed their name to Oda. That is that e-commerce brand where we actually reduced their carbon footprint by about 44%, or that food reduction or food waste reduction. Now, how did we actually do this? We did this through enabling our best practices. A lot of this is through centralizing processes while still giving stores that voice. So the communication between stores and central, how do we make sure that that's as optimal as possible while making sure that we can really focus on some of these other initiatives. The other piece of this is using a solution that's actually unified. It's adaptable, it's scalable. We can change things on the fly. We talked through a lot of different things with PetSmart yesterday, where they're using the solution in order to build new processes, adjust things on the fly, as well as create some of those what if scenarios. And then, of course, all of this incorporates that machine learning AI into that data to make sure that our recommendations for any of these orders are optimal. And then finally, as we're thinking about reducing risk by identifying proven partners, we really think that RELEX is the partner to partner with, not only with our results that we're seeing here, but these results are really typical of all of our fresh capabilities that we're working with customers. And again, all of this reduction is great because it's great for being socially responsible with our supply chains. But the other thing too is that this reduces a lot of these problems with profitability, especially as we think about grocers. So that's all that I have about tackling food waste for the presentation. I'd love to hear any questions that we have, and of course, if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to myself directly on the platform, and we can have a conversation.
Thank you, Alex. Those were some huge numbers, and I loved all the examples that you gave, and I especially liked the Kardashian example because
that's a good one.
Yeah, they take a picture of something and it just explodes, and you've got to have the inventory ready to go. But it was also really great to hear about how retailers can tackle such important issues in our industry, right? Like being socially responsible and sustainability and tackling food waste. So I appreciate you for sharing all of that with me. We do have some questions from the audience, so let's dive into those. One of the questions is, how does RELEX take weather into account? You mentioned weather numerous times, and so I'm really excited about this question because I want you to expand on that a little bit and talk about how it drives better fresh replenishment.
Yeah, great question. So with weather, again, it all starts with that demand forecast. So when we think about weather, we think about all these different effects that weather has as a consumer, right? If it's raining, I might actually go to the grocery store today. Now that's going to affect really all of my shopping patterns throughout the retailer. The other thing that's really important is temperature. So as temperatures increases, we've seen, a lot of data around all of a sudden Powerade becomes a hot item. We need to make sure that we have that on hand in preparation for some of these hot days. The other difficult part about weather is we do have to be really flexible and react quickly. Weather forecasts are only as good as 7 to 10 days out. So by having a supply chain that quickly reacts, whether it's for Powerade, whether it's for meats on the weekends for our barbecue, or whether it's how much lettuce am I actually going to be purchasing, all of that we can simulate any of those effects that weather has on that, but also make sure that it's great that we can simulate that, but what does that mean from an inventory picture? And that's where that integrated supply chain piece really comes in, because once we have identified any of those gaps or any of that interaction between weather and sales, we can quickly react and make sure that we have product at our stores.
Absolutely. I mean, I know, coming from a logistics background, how important weather and temperature plays, especially in the food supply chain. So you actually shared with us a lot of significant results that you have, as RELEX have been able to achieve. So what are some of the most powerful optimizations, specific to fresh, that have helped you achieve those significant results?
So I think the most powerful is how we're calculating safety stock specifically for fresh products, and that is not through, hey, let's just figure out what's our variability, what's our lead time, and calculate a safety stock. What we're actually doing is much much deeper, which is what is that balance between making sure that we have product for the customer, but making sure that it's not unprofitable for us to have that. Does it make sense for us to have a whole basket of tomatoes, or does it make sense for us to have half a basket of tomatoes on the shelf, depending on what that customer demand is, but also making sure that we're profitable as a business. So we don't want to give up any of that in stock or availability, but we also want to make sure that it doesn't cost us, valuable dollars that we could be investing elsewhere within the business.
Absolutely. So really quickly, one more question. Are there any other areas where you see that RELEX does help reduce food waste? I know we've talked a lot about them, or you've actually mentioned a lot. So is there anything in particular you want to mention before we go?
I would say that in terms of reducing food waste, I think one of the biggest pieces of this is actually being able to proactively see where it is that we're going to have spoilage, and actually react to that. So instead of, just saying, hey, oh shoot, we spoiled some, we can actually say, hey, next week, it looks like we're going to be spoiling a lot of product. Is there a deeper issue?
Right. I love that. Well, thank you again, Alex. That was a great session that is indeed good for the planet and for business.